Okay, so there are two scenarios now. One, what does Trump do? I mean, presumably he will not on election night graciously congratulate Kamala Harris on her victory and walk away. I think there will be all kinds of turmoil about him denying the election, about a lot of his supporters denying the election.
Hi there, it's WAMC News Director Ian Pickus, and on this episode of the WAMC News Podcast, how the Republican Party learned to stop worrying and start loving Donald Trump. Author Mark Leibovich of The Atlantic has spent years studying how figures in Washington secure power and hold on to it, often regardless of the outcome of any particular election. And he's also traced former President Donald Trump's stranglehold on the Republican Party since his movement's earliest days, as it has persisted through impeachments, convictions, and electoral defeats. Now, as we near another election, The Atlantic's latest issue is making some headlines of its own, with its wordless cover suggesting the peril to American institutions that may be in store in a second Trump term. Leibovich's new article is titled Hypocrisy, Spinelessness, and the Triumph of Donald Trump, and he joins us now. Thank you for being here.
Good to be with you.
One thing your article focuses on is the way that fellow Republicans talking about Donald Trump, the way that has changed in the past decade. And a lot of people who were once fierce critics basically stopped being fierce critics. How do you track that evolution?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's taken many forms. I think certainly if you look 8, 9 years ago when Trump sort of burst on the scene, there were a lot of people who did speak up, who didn't think he was serious, a lot of Republicans. And he was quite offensive, I mean, on its own, but also to a lot of the ideological tenets that Republicans have held dear for a long time, whether it's small government, whether it's fealty to NATO, and things like he was very protective of things like Social Security and so forth. Over the years, I mean, that capitulation has just mostly taken the form of silence. I think people have given up. I think a lot of Republicans, I mean, some Republicans, not maybe as many as I would have thought, but have walked away and sort of gone on with different careers. Some have openly condemned him, but for the most part, a lot of Republicans who decided they just want to kind of keep their jobs have kept their head down, and silence, I think, has become the prevailing language of resistance, such as it even is in the Republican Party these days.
Do you still see a separate Republican Party from Donald Trump today? I mean, does the party have that sort of traditional base left?
Less and less. I think if it does exist, it's certainly not making itself known. I mean, it's a Trumpist party. There's really no other way of saying it. And yes, there are people who will occasionally stick their head out and try to fight whatever is left of the good fight, but they usually lose. Trump will usually attack them, silence them, sometimes put them out of business. And I do think that, like if you talk to them silently, if you talk to them quietly in private, they will say something very different than what they say or don't say in public. But I think for the most part, it is a dormant part of the party. I think it's also a part of the party that doesn't exist anymore because a lot of people have taken a walk. And I think that, quite frankly, it's something that could lose Republicans the election in November.
Now, let's just posit that may happen. So if Vice President Harris does win the election, where does that leave the Republican Party? I know we've all in the past thought that maybe it would move on from Donald Trump, and that has never happened to this point. But, right. At this point, he would have lost 2 national elections. He'd be heading into his 80s the next time around.
Yeah, I mean, he's lost 2 national elections, presidential elections if he loses in November. Also underperformed massively in the midterm elections. He's gone out and recruited and encouraged a number of Republican candidates who have been disasters. So you would think that the third time would be the final message to maybe move on from him. I mean, if you lose enough, eventually you see, that it hasn't been good for you. But I do think it's worth pointing out, well, a couple things. One, Most Republicans have been able to keep their jobs by kind of keeping their head down. I mean, the way our politics are, it's so base centered. Most Republican House districts are safely drawn up for Republicans. So if you can avoid a primary, you're going to probably stay in that job. The other thing is, though, you mentioned, he's going to be in his 80s if he were to lose his time, if he wanted to run again, if he manages to stay out of jail. It's old. I think the act is getting tired. I do think this would be it if he were to lose. I think the party would probably try to move on quickly. But I also think there would be some incredible division in the party. There would be a reckoning, and there would be certainly remnants of his coalition that are still going to be very vocal going forward. So I think it would be a really big mess to try to clean up over the next few years. But the other part is that he's not exactly getting better with age. I don't think. I think he's I think wearing on a lot of patience. Whether people say it or not, and yeah, he just seems quite erratic these days. So I would like to think that if he does lose, this would be it. But who knows? He's shown incredible resilience over a number of years now.
Now, what if he wins the race? What do we expect he would do in the next 4 years? But also, he would still be term limited, so that would leave open the succession question too.
Yeah, I mean, I think if he wins, he will not have any checks and balances on him. He will. I mean, you mentioned, he would be term limited. I mean, I think, he doesn't adhere to any limits, whether they're constitutionally drawn or just sort of unwritten norms or anything. So, yeah, I mean, I think it would be extremely chaotic if he were to win. I think it would be very vindictive. I think there would be a great many um kind of quote unquote crises and just sort of fasten your seatbelts. I mean, I think the one thing we saw last time is that he was not able to get as much done as he intended, partly because it's not a terribly organized coalition, and he doesn't particularly stay focused for very long. But yeah, no, I mean, I think it could be potentially one of the most disruptive periods of our nation's history, but I think we also might be there already. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to understate how big the stakes are in this election.
Is there any scenario you see where Trump loses in November and that outcome is accepted by him and the party?
Yeah, it seems unlikely. I think, if you sort of look at scenarios for the election, I mean, there are probably three you'd have to look at. One, Trump wins, Harris concedes within a couple days, like normal candidates who lose elections typically have over the years, and then, fasten your seatbelts. Yeah, the other scenarios are Harris wins and there's sort of a two-part. Okay, so there are two scenarios now. One, what does Trump do? I mean, presumably he will not on election night graciously congratulate Kamala Harris on her victory and walk away. I think there will be all kinds of turmoil about him denying the election, about a lot of his supporters denying the election, about all kind of 11th hour efforts that they could try to make in Congress, in courts, that kind of thing. And then, the scenario is if assuming that Harris wins and all of the challenges are unsuccessful and she's able to get through the inauguration, I do think Trump would eventually just go away. I think he would probably talk for a long time. I think eventually he would lose his audience. But again, we're a long way from there. And I think there's not going to be a very clean result in November. I think it's going to take a long time to kind of reinforce, and hopefully our institutions are up to it.
I mean, do you think they are up to it? We know the Supreme Court has a very
Right.
Stark conservative majority that has been very receptive to Trump at different turns.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope so. I mean, I think I would say this. I mean, um, it probably is very helpful to the government working, or sort of a transition working properly, given that a Democrat is in the White House now. Joe Biden presumably would be in the White House through the transition, and unlike last time when Trump was in the White House, he would be able to wield the levers of power. I think the non-Supreme Court cases, if you look at 2020, have been quite responsible and thorough in looking at the individual cases. And I would like to think that the Supreme Court wouldn't have to get involved, and if they did, they would act responsibly. But they have surprised us over and over again. So we would see. But look, I can only say I would hope so.
Now, speaking of Biden, have you given a lot of thought to the differences between the way the Democratic Party dealt with Joe Biden, the sitting president, this summer, and how the GOP has dealt with its nominee, Trump, especially after the 2020 defeat?
Yeah, I mean, I was struck initially by some of the commonalities. I mean, I think there was a conspiracy of silence around Biden's age and about how much decline he had among Democrats. I mean, a lot of Democrats would not talk about that. I mean, meaning Republican. I mean, not Republican. I mean, public Democrats. I mean, people who are elected officials would not really say anything about it because either they were afraid of retribution from the White House or they were afraid of undermining Biden when it looked like he was running. So in some ways, there was a conspiracy of silence. In the same way that Republicans do not speak honestly or frankly about their own concerns about Trump's conduct. I think eventually that just ended. I think the first debate made it impossible to stay silent for much longer, and eventually it ended. But I do think that it's important to say that both sides were pretty. There was a bit. I wouldn't say it's a conspiracy, certainly on the side of the Democrats, but silence was the path that most people chose, and it took quite a bit of bravery to speak up. Um, Look, I mean, I think it's the Democrats are in a much better place now that they have a different candidate. Let's say that.
I want to follow up on something that you talked about a couple of minutes ago, and that is the way Trump has often kind of cost his party success. Like when you think about those Georgia Senate races and the Arizona governor's race, his messaging in especially the off-year elections has been muddled. And I'm just wondering, as you look at it over the past, decade of Trump being a national political figure, has he been a net benefit to Republican success electorally?
Um, I mean, I guess it depends on how you look at it. I mean, he certainly was in 2016. He helped Republicans down ballot. He seemed to broaden the base of the Republican Party in that he brought a lot of non-participating political people in, and also he drew quite a few Democrats and independents to the side of Republicans. That ended pretty quickly. So, I mean, the net benefit seemed to have a sort of small shelf life. But having said that, I mean, when you're president, as he was for 4 years, and might be again, but looking back, I mean, he was able to do some things. I mean, most notably, appoint three Supreme Court justices that had a fairly massive effect on the decisions and the policies that have come down from the court. Mainly, the ending of Roe v. Wade and the Dobbs decision, which has been majorly consequential in how this country has dealt with the issue of abortion. And while it hasn't been helpful at all, it seems, to Republicans at the ballot box, it remains the law of the land, and it remains massively, significant. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to know what the net plus and what the net minuses are. I think I think over time it's been a net minus electorally, but policy wise, it certainly had a lingering benefit to people who claim to agree with a lot of these policies.
Who's going to staff his White House if he wins again?
Um, I mean, that's kind of an open question. I mean, I think he clearly is putting a premium on loyalty, people who have been with him before, people who are willing to very openly and lavishly kiss the ring of his singularity within the party. Um, and I also think that, the question of how many checks and balances there would be, like from Senate confirmation and so forth. I mean, I do imagine that any Republican who gets elected these days will be doing so with a sense of having really been loyal to Trump and not being punished by voters for that. So yeah, it could be a real rogues gallery. I think the grown-ups that we sort of looked to last time, who might be the adults in the room, as people used to say, might not be around next time. So Yeah, it could be a real rogues gallery.
Okay, before I let you go, one of the times we chatted was about your excellent book on the NFL. Any storylines from the first couple of weeks of football jumping out to you right now?
Oh, good question. Well, I'm a Patriots fan, so I would say
Look, everyone's got something.
everyone's. Yeah, I know it hasn't. It doesn't make me very popular over the years, but we're kind of a lovable. I don't know if we're lovable, but nothing was expected of us, so we're off to a decent start. We've been very competitive. No, I mean, I just look. I'm just thrilled that football is back. I mean, it's really nice to just turn on TV and watch football games again. The New Orleans Saints look like the surprise team. They're putting a lot of points on the board, and I would say that it's just there's a lot of surprises. I mean, I think it's kind of I like the stories of underachieving teams. I mean, the New York Giants are always kind of fun to watch, and I think the NFL does such a good job marketing with a lot of their behind the scene things like Hard Knocks. And I watched the off season Hard Knocks with the New York Giants, so I kind of became interested in them. New York Jets with Aaron Rodgers are interesting. The Cowboys are always interesting. So no, just I like the bounty of it, the storylines. It's like like maybe a dozen reality shows going on at once. So anything that distract me from politics, I am these days.
As a Jet fan, I will say there's a
Oh,
parallel with what we've just been talking about and the Republican
interesting.
Party in that, Aaron Rodgers is a very imperfect avatar
Yeah.
to lead the Jets to the promised land for the first time
Hmm.
since 1969. So
Yeah,
it would be nice to see, but he's not the
it's
easiest
true.
person to root for.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, we kind of we don't always get the heroes we would sort of draw up in a lab, right? I
Yeah.
mean, again, as a Patriots fan, we have many crosses to bear over the years too. So, um, look, I mean, I think Aaron Rodgers, say what you will about him. I mean, he is a hell of a football player. He's been healthy for 2 weeks. So, and I love Jets fans. Some of my closest football friends are Jets fans, and they're my neighbors, and we watch games together. And I know that might sound patronizing coming from a Pats fan, but I don't know. I am always it's always fun to root for games or to watch games with Jets fans, especially when you know when the sort of psychodrama takes over. So yeah, the Jets and the Pats play this I guess Thursday night, so I will be watching, and I assume you will be too, Ian.
Yes, good luck, Mark. And it's
Good
always
luck to
great
you.
having a chance to catch up with you. Mark Leibovich's new article in The Atlantic is called Hypocrisy, Spinelessness, and the Triumph of Donald Trump. Great having you back on, and good luck to your Patriots.
Same. Thanks to you, Ian. Always good to be with you.
Okay, that does it for this episode of the WAMC News Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, I'm Ian Pickus.